Friends, I think it's time to start. It's 2 o'clock in Chicago and it's 8 o'clock in London. My name is Andrew Wolpert. I'm serving as program director here in Rudolf Steiner branch, Chicago. And I would like to ask you maybe in the beginning to send a warm greeting to Andrew and to all of us by typing in the chat window. And also, please put your location in it. So I'm very excited to see how many people and what countries and what languages we are representing. You know, can you type it? And I will count on 3. And please press on enter on 3. All right, are you ready? 1, 2, 3. Let's see this beautiful waterfall. Last week we reached a big community in South Africa. Is any friends from South Africa? Please unmute yourself.
Oh, to maintain order, I'm not allowing people to unmute themselves.
Oh, I'm sorry. Any people from Australia, specifically from West Australia? It's 4 o'clock in the morning. Any friends from Moscow and St. Petersburg, Russia? It's, I believe it's 11 or 10 o'clock p.m. Yeah, thank you, thank you. Lots of friends from Canada, of course. Now I would like to formally introduce Andrew. Andrew gave 2 outstanding presentations for last week on January 29th and on February 5th. And this talk, this very short title, Forgiveness, is logical continuation of those 2. Andrew Wolpert worked for 17 years at Emerson, for 9 years at the Waldorf teacher training in the university in Stuttgart, and has been giving courses, seminars, and lectures on various aspects of anthroposophy, literature, art history, Parsifal, Shakespeare, in Britain, Europe, Australia, and Asia. I'd like to introduce also our technical host for this meeting. It will be Jonathan Headley. Jonathan serving as secretary for our council, and he is our technical support. Andrew, over to you. I'm sorry, to Jonathan. Jonathan, over to you.
Thank you. I'm just going to briefly explain some technical things before handing things over to Andrew. For the duration of the presentation, we already have 138 people here. And so to reduce interruption, I've muted everyone and I'm disabling muting until the question and answer period. If you have any questions or concerns, feel free to message me in the chat window. We're also recording, so if you would like to say something but would rather not be included on a recording, let us know and I can be sure to edit you out before sharing anything online. So yeah, with that, I will hand it over to Andrew. Thank you.
Thank you, Jonathan, and thank you, Andre. Well, good evening, dear friends, and welcome to this session together. Yes, when Andre asked me if I would do something, immediately the topic of forgiveness came to mind, and I gave him this short title, Forgiveness. But in preparing for this talk, I've decided I want to change the title slightly. I want to actually call our theme this evening, Beyond Forgiveness. I hope that's not, I don't know, you'll let me know perhaps if you feel that that's an outrageous title to have chosen. I want to say very clearly from the beginning that I don't pretend to have answers in this field. I'm just willing to share the work that I've been doing in this area and really I have questions, and I'm glad to share with you how far I've got with all of this. And although some of the things that I say may come in the form of statements and sentences, actually really they're all questions, and I'd be glad if any of you have complementary or even opposite thoughts to enrich the theme for us this evening. But I'd like to start with a question. And the question is, would you rather be forgiven or would you rather be understood? And it seems to me that that question goes right to the heart of our theme this evening. You may feel that you don't want to just be absolved from whatever it is you may have done to hurt or injure another person, but you may feel that you want to be seen, and that you want what you have done to be seen in the whole context of who you are, and to be seen in an understanding way that includes not just the weakness, but also your striving and your efforts to overcome aspects of yourself. You may feel that you wish to be understood, and that may be a more affirming and supportive experience than, I don't want to say merely being forgiven, because to be forgiven is a great thing, but maybe you can grasp what I'm trying to say with this. Might it be a different feeling if you're understood? And could one perhaps even say that if you're understood, the forgiveness is somehow implicit in that? I will begin by giving examples of the way the word forgive is used quite usually. So sometimes you may hear other people saying, yes, yes, of course I forgive you. Don't worry, I love you. Let's pretend it never happened and go on as we were before. There's a kind of sentimentality to that. And I think it's obvious that there's a kind of illusion. And if one imagines that that's really solving the problem, then I think you will experience that a little later, the unsatisfactoriness of that avoidance will come back and threaten the relationship. So that kind of forgive and forget syndrome doesn't really count for me as forgiveness in terms of our theme this evening. There's another kind of forgiveness as well, where if you are sorry, if you regret what you've done, then I will forgive you. If I make that a condition, or if I observe that you are sorry and that I will forgive you, that's also a kind of forgiveness, I suppose, but it's a kind of conditional situation where the forgiveness depends on the remorse. I'm not saying that isn't valid. I'm just characterizing it as something that isn't entirely free. There's yet another kind of forgiveness where the one who is asked to forgive may say, yes, I will forgive you if you are sorry and if you promise never to do that again. Well, it seems to me that's worse than a condition. It becomes a kind of transaction. It's a transactional sort of thing where your weakness at having hurt me in some way puts you at a disadvantage and gives me the right now to exercise a kind of control over you, and not just now, but into the future. I can extract a promise from you that you will never do it again in exchange for being forgiven. I think you can hear that this is a power game, and it's a kind of travesty of what forgiveness could actually be. Sometimes the call for justice can be a kind of socialized and legitimized form of revenge. It might be that your contrition moves me to forgive you, and that's different. But if I demand contrition from you as a condition for forgiving you, I feel that's then not the same free forgiveness that I'm interested in. So if these are things that purport to be forgiveness, but which I have difficulty with, and which certainly don't belong to my theme this evening, what actually is forgiveness in the sense that I would like to work with it for the next hour or so. And I'll put it quite starkly and then attempt to justify what I'm saying as I build it up after that. But I would like to suggest that a real, a true forgiveness might be something like this. You have hurt me or you have injured me, but I forego absolutely any need or expectation to be apologized to. I forego any need to feel remorse in you. I forego the need for any kind of compensation or retribution. I simply let go of all those things that perhaps under another paradigm I might be entitled to have, and I freely let go of anything that flows from this in the way of a debt from you to me. And I don't even ask for that to be acknowledged or to be thanked for. And you can say, wow, is that real? Is that sort of a gesture really possible? It seems to deny so much of the social transactions that we are used to. It seems to fly in the face of recognizing the soul limitations, the inadequacies that we're all burdened with. It seems also to deny the truth of a legal system which entitles me to some kind of justice, some kind of recompense, and to expect that if somebody injures me in this way, that they will be punished. What I'm suggesting is not something that is enshrined in any of the inherited codes of how we behave or how we treat each other. And yet I don't want to let go of this. It seems to me that that kind of absolute and unconditional forgiveness is the one that I would like to focus on this evening. So if you're familiar with what happens in the Roman Catholic Church, for example, you will know that absolution depends on three things. It depends on confession, it depends on repentance, and then on penitence. So you have to confess to your sins, you have to express the fact that you regret that you have done this and that you feel sorry, remorse, you're contrite. And then you have to accept whatever penitence the Father Confessor imposes on you. And it might be to pray, it might be to build a church, it might be to do some kind of deed. And you take that on gladly in exchange for being then absolved of the consequences of this sin. And this threefold step, this threefold process, actually has a kind of deep wisdom in it, because it represents in a microcosmic way precisely what we will experience after we have died, gone through the 3 days of letting go of some aspects of our being, and then when we come into the moon sphere, into Kamaloka, I think as many of you will know, we embark on a journey backwards through our life, not as we experienced what we did, but as what we did was experienced by the companions and those around us. So in that backward journey, experiencing how our behavior was experienced by our companions, we will come across moments when we suddenly maybe realize much more strongly than we ever realized in life exactly how badly we hurt or injured somebody. And the experience of that will be painful. And the experience of that will then also give rise to a recognition that this has to be purged. It has in a way to be burnt away. A kind of purgation needs to take place. And although that will be painful, it's very interesting that Rudolf Steiner says we will find that pain good, because we will recognize that that purging fire is exactly what we need in order to take the next step. And out of that recognition may come the resolve, I would like in the next incarnation to meet this individual whom I wronged, so that destiny will give me the chance to in some way make good what I failed to do last time. So this threefold process in the church, in a way, is a kind of preparation for what we will then experience after we have crossed the threshold and entered into the spiritual world. I'm not a Catholic and I don't experience this, but I can imagine that if every week you go through this process, it might well be a rehearsal, a preparation for what then happens in a much greater context. But is it possible for someone whose destiny does not bring them to a church? Is it indeed possible for someone whose destiny doesn't even bring them to any kind of religious consciousness? Is it possible for human beings who don't necessarily believe in life after death, much less in a next incarnation? Is it possible for them also in this life on earth to take steps that are not just a preparation for life after death, but a preparation for the next incarnation, whether or not in this life that is an element in their consciousness, whether or not they're at all aware of this? There are many steps which lead to this threshold of such forgiveness. And there stands behind all this, there lives behind all this, a great archetype that I would like to try and put into words. It's a mighty event that belongs to the evolution of humanity as a whole, and that point cannot be overemphasized. I'm referring to a cosmic, human, earthly event that involves the whole of humanity, whether or not their destiny allows them to be conscious of it or not. When the Sun being left the sun, he united his destiny with the destiny of human beings on earth. And there are many aspects of that deed of Christ's that could be considered. But for the theme this evening, I would like to focus just on one aspect of that great deed of Christ's. When I commit an act that is injurious to somebody else, when I hurt or cause suffering to somebody else, there are two separate consequences of that. The first one is that the world itself, one could even say the earth, is burdened by this inhuman deed. Something externally is changed. The world itself is burdened by that. And the second consequence is something that then lives in the karma between me and the person that I have injured. In a lecture that Rudolf Steiner gave about Christ as he hangs on the cross between the two malefactors, and I will give you that reference at the end of this talk. I won't interrupt now to give you the reference so you can write it down at the end. And in this lecture, Rudolf Steiner describes how the consequences for the world of our misdeeds are much greater than we could ever remedy, that we could ever repair, that we could ever make good. So it is those consequences for the world, the consequences for the earth that Christ takes on. The consequences between the karma of the individuals concerned is something that remains for them to work out. But I'd like to focus for a moment on this idea that the consequences for the world of our misdeeds are taken on by Christ. There is a line in the Mass that very beautifully expresses that. Agnus Dei qui tollis peccata mundi. Lamb of God that takes away the sins of the world. You could translate that as takes away, or you could translate that as takes on. It is that Christ takes on. It's not that he takes it away in the sense that it's gone. He takes it upon himself, but leaves for us the task of bringing order into the interpersonal karma that arises as a result of how I have mistreated you. So what about this interpersonal karma then between us? And I would like to take this in stages. In the Old Testament, generally there is the understanding that it is only God who can forgive. I would like to remind you of the story of Joseph and his brothers. It comes in Genesis chapters 42 to 50. And I won't repeat the whole story now. I think many of you will know it, but the brothers have mistreated Jonathan, mistreated Joseph so badly. They think that he has been killed. And when their land is then ravaged by famine and they come to Egypt, hoping to buy grain, they don't realize that the man who is now willing to give them grain is actually their lost brother. But of course, he recognizes them and he gives them the grain that they ask for. He gives them more than they ask for. And this goes on, and there's some traveling back and forth. And at the end, when the brothers realize who it is that they're dealing with, they're afraid maybe that Joseph will punish them or exact some kind of revenge for their having treated him so badly. And they ask him for forgiveness. And perhaps you recall the way in which Joseph responds to that request for forgiveness. What he says is, "Am I in the place of God?" And I find that quite remarkable, because he could say, "No, I cannot forgive. Only God can forgive." But he doesn't say that. He asks them a question and says, "Am I in the place of God?" That's what he says. But what does he do? He gives them all that they ask for and more. So he shows through his will, and he shows through what he does for them, that he carries no remorse, no resentment, no wish in any way to punish them for what they did to him. His actions show everything that is tantamount to forgiveness and more, to love. But I find it remarkable that Joseph responds to the request for forgiveness with a question, "Am I in the place of God?" So what the brothers experience is an absolutely godlike, divine love and forgiveness from Joseph, but he can't say, "I forgive you," but he can show that he does. And so if amongst these brothers there are one or two who are awake to this, maybe in their souls arises the response to this question, yes, you are in the place of God in the way you treat us. And it seems to me that if I've understood this story correctly, that it prefigures the Pauline dictum, "Not I, but Christ lives in me." So in the New Testament, in the Gospels, there are at least, I found, 11 examples of where Christ forgives. And there's one particular one that I would like to focus on now. It comes in the dialogue between the scribes and the Pharisees that they have with Christ after he has healed the paralytic. It comes in the Gospel of Luke, chapter 5. And Christ heals the paralytic, tells him to get up and walk, and tells him that his sins are forgiven. But the scribes and the Pharisees have been watching and waiting for an opportunity to try and entrap him. And so they say to Christ, "Who can forgive but God?" And Christ's answer is, "The Son of Man has power on earth to forgive sins." Now, the terms Son of Man and Son of God have exercised theologians for centuries, and I'm not going to go into that at all. But I want to note that the way Christ answers that is he refers to himself as the Son of Man. And I take from that episode the following. As the Lamb of God, Christ takes on the sins of the world that we have committed. But now, as the Son of Man, the same Christ seems to take on something else. He takes on the sins, he forgives, and I think that means to take on the sins. He forgives something that lives in the personal destiny of the paralytic. If I'm right in understanding it that way, it's an example of what Christ did that can remind me of what, after the mystery of Golgotha, I too can attempt to do myself. Not out of my merely personal human forces, but by virtue of the fact that I too can say, not I, but Christ lives in me. So when Christ answers the scribes and Pharisees by saying the Son of Man is able on earth to forgive the sins, I understand that to be a reminder of the deepest longing that I have within me to rise to that potential in my interpersonal relationships with others, not by virtue of who I am and my incompleteness, but because I too, after the mystery of Golgotha, can say, not I, but Christ lives in me. And if I unconditionally and freely forgive you for what you've done to me, setting you free of the karmic consequences of what you have done, I have then taken on something of your karma. And we will see what that can become, because it sounds like it's only going to be a burden for me. And it may be something that I have to carry, but it may be something that doesn't have to remain a burden. So if Christ takes on the consequences for the earth of what we have done, and if we can take on for each other the consequences that lie in the interpersonal karma, there still remains a third thing that needs to be done. And that is the need for me inwardly to come to terms with what has happened. So what does it mean then to forgive in this interpersonal context? Excuse me. What does it mean if I do not forgive you? If I do not forgive you, then when you come to Kamaloka, when you come to embark on this reverse journey through the whole of your life and have to live through how your deeds were experienced, at the appropriate moment, you will come across, you will encounter the consequences of what you did to me. And if I have not forgiven you, you will have to go through the necessary purging, and you may give birth to the intention to wish to meet me again so that you can compensate me for what you did last time. And it may be that if the angels play their part in organizing destiny so beautifully well, that really we will meet again, and destiny will then give you the chance to in some way make good what you didn't manage to do well last time. And if I don't forgive you, that course will run. These events will run their course, and we will be bound together in the next incarnation to find each other and have the opportunity of making good that which was not forgiven in the previous incarnation. But what happens, I want to put it the other way around now, what happens if I've treated you badly and you do forgive me? If you forgive me for what I have done to you, then again, in this reverse journey through Kamaloka after death, when I come to that moment and realize what it is that I injured you and how I wronged you, when I come to that moment in the biography, going backwards, yes, I will maybe realize much more strongly than I ever realized last time on earth how painful that was for you, what I did. And I will have to go through some kind of purging for myself. But when it comes to the need, when it comes to the impulse in me to meet you again so that I can compensate you, a totally different experience will be mine then in this moon sphere in Kamaloka. Because if you have forgiven me, I will experience at that moment that you have taken away the need to be compensated. And instead of my now feeling, I will gladly meet you again to repair the wrong that I did you, I will experience the warmth of your having forgiven me and the possibility that when we meet again in the next incarnation, it will not be to deal with the unfinished business of the last life. It will be so that together we can become companions in work that we do together for others. I would like just to re-emphasize that because I find it quite extraordinary. If there is no forgiveness, the meeting in the next incarnation remains the business between us. In a way, we're bound to that. We freely choose to take that on. But if there has been forgiveness, what it means is that in the next life, the meeting will take place, but it will not be to repair what lives undealt with between us. It will be so that together we can embark on something for others. We become collaborators. We become companions. I want to not put it less than this. We become companions with Christ. The forgiveness in one life enables that kind of a collaboration and companionship in the next life. So it seems as if forgiveness is something that deals with the past, cleans up, deals with the business from the past. And it certainly has that aspect, but much more significantly, it becomes the beginning of a process that can serve into an unpredictable future where we work together, not for ourselves, but for others. There is another aspect of this that I would like to also try and put into words. In the journey between death and rebirth, in our journey through the spiritual, through the planetary spheres in the spiritual world, after we've been through the moon sphere, after we've been through Kamaloka and through the other planets, we come outside of the planets to the fixed stars, we come to the zodiac, and beyond that, we come to a moment, a sphere that Rudolf Steiner calls the cosmic midnight hour. And in that place, strange word, when we reach the cosmic midnight hour, we have an encounter. We have an encounter with the archetypal human being that we are not yet. We meet the risen Christ. And in that encounter with the risen Christ, we experience very painfully the discrepancy between what I am and what I not yet am. In the encounter with the risen Christ, the archetypal human being, I see how far I am from achieving that humanity. And the pain of that discrepancy would be unbearable if it was not that that experience is completely suffused, completely imbued with love. Love for me in all my incompleteness, love for me that sees me, that acknowledges the whole of my being with my incompleteness and also my strivings. And most importantly, a love that gives me the courage to say, yes, I will incarnate again and continue this unfinished business. Do you remember my first question? Would you rather be forgiven or would you rather be understood? And I would like to leave it as a question. If I have managed to describe something of that encounter with the risen Christ in this midpoint between death and rebirth, if I've managed to describe that encounter and the love that surrounds and carries the experience of my still incompleteness and that gives me the courage to incarnate again and go on, if I've managed to describe that in a way that resonates with you, then I leave you with the question, is forgiveness the right word to describe that? What sort of an experience is that? And hence, maybe you understand why I chose to change my title. I feel that such an experience may certainly include forgiveness, but somehow it seems to me that it is beyond forgiveness. So Christ takes on the consequences of our misdeeds for the world. Can that be described as forgiveness? What I experience in my encounter with Christ between death and rebirth, do I experience that I am forgiven? And when you free me of the need to compensate you for my injury to you, and you take on something of my karma that becomes transformed to be the energy for us in the next incarnation to collaborate together as companions in Christ, is forgiveness the word that describes that? And now what about the last part, the part that I have to deal with myself? Christ takes on the consequences for the world. You may take on the interpersonal karma between us so that we become companions in the next incarnation and collaborate together. But there's still something left for me to do in myself. And this has to do with recognizing with some shame, maybe, even though I've been forgiven, I still may feel a kind of shame and guilt and remorse for what I did. And it may be that this feeling of shame, guilt, and remorse have their necessary therapeutic task as part of the soul process that I have to go through. But clearly, it would be unhealthy if I were allowed this shame, this guilt, and this remorse to be all-consuming. If I allowed this to be something that persisted in me in such a way that I was unable then to get on with life. So somewhere I have to find a way of dealing myself with the last part of this process that I've described. How do I deal with that in such a way that I'm able to carry on, to pick myself up, to go on with life, conscious of my inadequacies, but nevertheless confident that I can continue life with a courage for the future. Now, the importance of that is something that is well recognized. And I think you will be familiar with a trend in modern psychology that recognizes this. And sometimes it's called the need to forgive yourself. And about 11 years ago, Fred Luskin of the University in Stanford gave this term a kind of academic respectability. And he wrote about the importance of forgiving yourself. But he and the others who have sort of followed in the wake of this development by Luskin, others have then described that the significance of forgiving yourself has nothing to do with the other. It's an important step to take in order to free yourself, in order to ease the burden of guilt and of shame, so that you can get on with life. And it's described in this particular academic tradition, and also by some psychologists, as the step that you take in order simply to be able to manage and to get on with life. And I understand completely, I think, the importance of taking that step. I have a question, though, whether the word forgive is the right word to describe what I then have to do with myself in order to participate once again fully in the creative process for the future. There's something in me that wants to keep the word forgive for what one individual can freely bestow on another. And I wonder whether forgive is the right word to describe the inner housekeeping of the soul that I have to do for myself. I would like, if I may now, to look at 5 examples of forgiveness that come in Shakespeare's plays. And I would like to start with Romeo and Juliet. So this play is popularly understood as a tragedy because the young couple die so young, with the whole of their life apparently before them, and cut short by the circumstances that lead them both to kill themselves. It's understood as a tragedy normally. And of course, it has a tragic aspect. And if you know the play, you will know that at the very end of the play, the 2 fathers, Capulet and Montague, stand together over the tomb on which the bodies of their children, Juliet and Romeo, lie, both having killed themselves. And you would expect from the whole of the vendetta that stands behind the story of the play and probably goes back generations, you would expect that these 2 old men would shake their fists at each other and say, look, you are responsible for the death of my child. No, 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 it's you who is responsible for the death of my child. You would expect the old men to engage in the continuation of this vendetta. That's what predicting the future on the basis of the past would lead to. But something quite different happens. Juliet's father looks at Romeo's father, takes his hands and says, now these are my words, let's cease this fighting between us. I will build a statue to your child in gold. And Romeo's father says, and I will do the same. I will build a statue in gold to your child. And there's something quite extraordinary about this moment. On the tomb between them, and I imagine them standing on either side of the tomb, on the tomb between them, in this dark place of death, lie the bodies of their children. The 2 old men take hands over the bodies of their children and speak about gold. They speak about statues in gold. I hope doesn't seem too much to you if I say the whole of the mystery of Golgotha is epitomized in this moment. There, in the dark place at death, the two old men bring the quality of the sun in the gold to the way in which they look at each other in a brotherly way and resolve to end the fighting that has led to this tragedy. It's an early play of Shakespeare's. It traditionally falls in the group of plays called the comedies. Comedies don't necessarily mean that there are jokes and that we laugh. The word commedia means that there's a dancing together in a joyful, I don't want to say happy end, resolution at the end of the play. But usually we're so overwhelmed by the emotional tragedy of the fact that Romeo and Juliet died so young that we may miss the significance of this ending, because this ending actually is something that the prologue to the play should prepare us for. It says right at the beginning of the play that this strife between the two families, nothing will remove this strife but the death of the children. It is as if the children need to die in order to bring a resolution between the two families, a reconciliation. That doesn't make the story of Romeo and Juliet into a happy end or a comedy, but the play as a whole invites us to recognize that this death is not gratuitous, it's not the result of a mistake, it actually has a task, and the two old men realize that. So right at the beginning, amongst his early plays, Shakespeare gives a taste of what, I cannot say forgiveness now, because they don't use the words forgive, but there is a reconciliation. There's an understanding that this must stop. And it's expressed by the old men who take hands and speak of gold. Hannah Arendt speaks about forgiveness, and she speaks about it in the following words. The forgiver refuses to follow the conflict mechanism and is free, a self-determined action. I don't think she particularly had the ending of Romeo and Juliet in mind when she said that, but this refusal to follow the conflict mechanism. I think mechanism is an unexpected word there, but actually it's a good word, because something mechanical has a predictable, if it's working well, has a predictable course. And it's precisely that predictable course that the fathers of Romeo and Juliet do not fulfill. They do something that could never have been predicted out of the past. The death of their children awakens in them the wish to do something that they have not done till then. And in this dark place of death, the sun shines in their forgiveness and in their words of gold. Forgiveness also happens in Hamlet. So Laertes and Hamlet end up killing each other with the same sword that is poisoned. And it's a beautiful example of something that occurs in several of Shakespeare's plays. When somebody is mortally wounded but not yet dead, they're able to say something that until that moment, apparently, they were not able to say to each other. And as Laertes and Hamlet lie on the stage, poisoned and dying, but not yet dead, they exchange forgiveness with each other. It's an example, and there are others in Shakespeare, it's an example of where death is already present, but the forces of new life that live in that will to forgive manifest in the presence of impending death. I find that remarkable. But there is something even more pertinent to our theme of forgiveness in Hamlet than the mutual forgiveness between Hamlet and Laertes, and it comes a little earlier. Claudius realizes that everybody now knows how he is responsible, or at least he knows now that Hamlet realizes. Because of the play within the play, Claudius interrupts the play and goes up to his room. And then the most extraordinary thing happens. He is the villain. He is the villain in the play. He has killed his brother in order to have the crown and to marry his brother's wife, Gertrude. And he then has a monologue in which he says, my crime is rank. It has the eldest brother's curse. He is aware that killing his brother is a kind of reenactment of the Cain and Abel story. And he says, how can I ever ask to be forgiven while I retain the fruits of my crime? I'm not prepared to give up being king, and I'm not prepared to give up my wife, Gertrude. So how can I ever ask to be forgiven, knowing that actually I don't repent, if I put it into my words? Maybe I repent the deed, but I'm not prepared to give up what I did that deed for. So he knows very well that he cannot ask God to forgive him. And yet, he says, but I will try. I will try. I will see what is possible. And he says, bend stubborn knees. He's never knelt in his life before. He's expected people to kneel in front of him. But he kneels down and he prays. He says, I will try. Let's see what's possible. And on the one hand, you could say that's pretty foolish, because he's just expressed quite clearly that he's not entitled to be forgiven. And yet he tries. And what I find remarkable about that is that, knowing full well that he doesn't deserve to be forgiven, he nevertheless perseveres in the confidence, in the faith that it might just be possible. And at the end of the prayer, he feels the prayer has failed, because he says, my words fly up, my thoughts remain below. Words without thoughts never to heaven go. So his experience is that he has failed. But we can add something to that. That self-knowledge that lives throughout that speech, and particularly at the end, that self-knowledge brings him much closer to the divine, much closer to God than he ever realizes. It's now not my business to say whether or not he's going to be forgiven. That's not the point. The point is that Shakespeare's genius here expresses itself in the fact that the villain knows himself so well. Perhaps it's a reminder of the fact that when Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden eat the fruit, the forbidden fruit, it's the fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and evil. And there is no doubt that Claudius knows himself. And in that sense of knowing himself, he's closer to the divine than maybe he is afraid. How could I not mention Lear? Well, the word forgiveness comes at the end in the dialogue between Lear when he's reunited with Cordelia, but it's not a request for forgiveness. There is the most beautiful reconciliation between Lear and Cordelia. And it's a reconciliation in which the word forgiveness is not mentioned. And yet the reconciliation is imbued with something that I would like to say is beyond forgiveness. It's a mutual recognition. In Cymbeline, there's a wonderful moment when Iachimo kneels down to Posthumus and says, I lied to you, I've treated you badly, I deserve to be killed. Kill me because I have mistreated you. Iachimo recognizes what he has done and also recognizes that the appropriate thing now is for him to have to pay with his life for that. And Posthumus Leonatus has the most wonderful reply. He says, kneel not to me, don't kneel to me. The power that I have on you is to spare you. The malice towards you to forgive you. Live and deal with others better. It's an extraordinary moment in the play. Look at the words. The malice towards you to forgive you. Just look at the metamorphosis in that line. The words malice and forgive are juxtaposed. The malice, what could be malice in me, becomes forgiveness. The power I have of you is to spare you. The power, I could bring about your death now, but that power changes into the recognition that you should live, to spare you. And then, isn't the next line wonderful? Live and deal with others better. There's one more play I would like to, how are we doing for time? There's one more play that I'd like to mention, and that is, of course, The Tempest. There's one very powerful example of forgiveness there. When Prospero confronts his brother Antonio, who has usurped him and who, together with the King of Naples, has conspired to have him exiled onto the island with his daughter Miranda, there comes a moment where Prospero then is in a position to have his revenge. And it's quite extraordinary because for 12 years that he's been on the island, he has harbored this motive of revenge. There's no getting away from that. He's done lots of other things. He's obviously been a very good father, because when we see Miranda at the age of 15, she's absolutely ready for the world and for life. She's obviously not been neglected by her father. So in one sense, he's been a very good parent to her, obviously. We see that in her, not in anything he says. But it's also true that for 12 years, he's cultivated his magic arts and actually has been looking forward to the opportunity to take his revenge. But when he confronts his brother Antonio, he says, "Flesh and blood, you brother mine, I do forgive you, unnatural though thou art." So it's not the kind of sentimental forgiveness, oh, you're my brother, and you know, let's forget all this and be brotherly and so on. It's not a forgive and forget, not at all. I know you, and still I forgive you. It's an unconditional forgiveness. He doesn't know how Antonio will respond, and he doesn't expect any signs of remorse. And then at the end of the play, Prospero has a famous monologue in which he comes to the front of the stage and he says, "I've given up my magic arts. I stand here before you just as a weak human being, and I now need you," speaking to the audience, "I now need you to give me what I need so that I can go back to Milan. I ask that you release me from my bands with the help of your good hands, so that at the end of the play, please clap, and that will be what I need to be relieved of the situation that I'm in." And the last two lines of this monologue and of the whole play are these: "As you from crimes would pardoned be, let your indulgence set me free." Now, if you just observe carefully what actually lives in those lines, about 10 minutes earlier, he has forgiven his brother Antonio unconditionally. But now at the end of the play, what is he saying? He's saying, if you expect one day to be forgiven, please forgive me now. And I hope I will not offend you if I exaggerate that a little bit and paraphrase it in the following way. What he's saying is, look, you might need to be forgiven one day, and therefore, why don't you forgive me now and invest in the forgiveness business a little bit, so that when you need to be forgiven, you'll have this credit to you already. I realize this is rather a gross paraphrasing, but it seems to me that that's what Prospero is saying. And I'll tell you why. Because if he's saying that to the audience has, there are two choices. The one choice is to say, oh yes, inwardly, oh yes, you're quite right. It's prudent to forgive, because then if I need to be forgiven, I can always claim I forgave. And so I will clap and release you, Prospero, because of what you're asking. But it's possible for a member of the audience to have a different response. It's possible for a member in the audience to say, yes, Prospero, you ask now to be forgiven, and you ask to be forgiven on this transactional basis. But I remember that 10 minutes ago, you forgave your brother unconditionally. And that reminded me of my capacity to do the same for you now. So yes, I will clap and I will set you free. I will forgive you, but not because I hope one day then that I might also be forgiven, but because I can do what you ask freely and out of love for you. And if just one person in the audience that night in the theater can allow that to live in her soul as she watches the play, the moral quality of what lives in the theater at that moment is something totally new. It's not what Shakespeare wrote. It doesn't depend on what the actor playing Prospero says. It depends on someone in the audience awakening to the possibility of following the example that Prospero himself gave a little earlier, and in a way redeeming the basis on which Prospero asks to be forgiven at the end of the play, and forgiving him for precisely the kind of unconditional basis that he had for his brother Antonio a few minutes earlier. And I make much of this point because it's interesting also for another reason. In Midsummer Night's Dream, Love's Labour's Lost, Hamlet, and The Tempest, these are plays in which there is a play within the play. And if you're familiar with these plays, you will remember the following: that in this play within the play, there are some actors who are playing the actors, and there are some actors on the stage playing the audience on the stage. And in each of these cases, the play within the play cannot come to its conclusion because the actors playing the audience on the stage interrupt the play and don't let the actors playing the actors finish their play. I'm sorry, that's rather complicated, but I hope I've explained it in a way that you can follow. And I think it's almost as if Shakespeare is exploring this theme in earlier plays, because what happens then in those plays on the stage is that the distinction between the audience and the actors is dissolved. They're all actors on the stage. But now at the end of The Tempest, when Prospero comes to the footlights, to the front of the stage and says, please forgive me, what happens next depends on you. And if what then comes from even only one member of the audience that night, but if what comes from the audience is the selfless forgiveness that Prospero himself was capable of a few moments earlier, then what happens in the theater is a dissolving of the distinction between the audience and the actors. Together, they become responsible for the moral substance that then lives for a moment, or maybe for longer, in the theater through that dynamic. Now, every actor will tell you that there's constantly something coming from the audience towards the actors. They depend on feeling what it is that comes towards them. So that's not something new. But I think what I've tried to describe in the case of Prospero's last petition and the potential of someone in the audience responding to it beyond the forgiveness that Prospero is asking for, I think that's something special. And I think it's somehow a dissolving of the distinction in the drama between the audience and the actors. we all become actors. We all become part of the drama. And I also think the idea of a play within a play is something very beautiful, because we could also say the theatre is a theatre in the stage of the whole world. We can ask, what is the origin of Prospero's forgiving his brother Antonio? Why, after 12 years of carrying this motive of revenge, does he suddenly melt and forgive his brother? And at the very beginning of Act 5, Prospero has a dialogue with Ariel, and Prospero asks Ariel, how are these people on the island, including my brother and the King of Naples and his brother and so on? And Ariel says, they're where I left them following your command, Prospero. And how are they? And Ariel says that if you could see them, your affections would become tender. So Ariel is referring to what he knows very well is this feeling of vengeance that lives in Prospero. And Ariel says, if you now beheld them, your affections would become tender. And Prospero says, does thou think so, Spirit? Do you really think so? They would my affections become tender if I could see them? And Ariel says, mine would so were I human. Ariel says, my affections would become tender if I were human. How does he know that? How does he know that if he was human, his affections would become tender? He's not human. How does he know that? But when he says, mine would, sir, were I human, Prospero immediately answers, and mine shall. And this is a turning point in the play. For 12 years, Prospero has held Ariel in bondage. Ariel has been obliged to serve Prospero. And there comes this moment then at the beginning of Act 5, where this dialogue between Ariel and Prospero gives birth in Prospero to the idea, to the impulse to let go of the vengeance. And one could perhaps easily think that it's Ariel who brings this intuition to Prospero. Ariel, this being of the air, brings some kind of spiritual message to Prospero, and he says, oh yes, I will forgive my brother. I don't think it's like that at all. I think something else is happening. Ariel has been so close to Prospero for 12 years that he begins to discern something in Prospero that Prospero himself has not yet uncovered. This proximity for 12 years has allowed Ariel to see into Prospero's heart. And Ariel can see that beneath that conscious wish for revenge, there lives a deep yearning to forgive. And Ariel can reflect that to Prospero. And because it's true, Prospero can then recognize it. How else would Ariel know that? He says, if I were human, my feelings would melt. How can he ever say that since he is not human? He can say that because he has perceived that in his master, and he can reflect that to Prospero, and because it is true, Prospero can recognize it. And the amazing thing is that shortly after that, Prospero releases Ariel. It is as if Prospero has needed Ariel to be there for 12 years so that he would find this out and show him what he himself had not yet awakened to within himself. So these last lines of Prospero's, as you from crimes would pardoned be, let your indulgence set me free, may remind us of the second petition in the Lord's Prayer. Forgive us our trespasses as we forgive them that trespass against us. Powerful words. What do they mean? Again, please forgive me now if I paraphrase this holy second petition in very earthly, maybe even gross terms. Please forgive me, but I would like to do that. I think when we approach the Father God with this petition, forgive us our trespasses as we forgive them that trespass against us, we're actually saying to God, follow my example. Treat me as I have treated others. Forgive us our trespasses as we forgive them that trespass against us. How dare a human being approach the Father God with such hubris, with such pride? Surely the basis on which we can say that is again with reference to the Pauline dictum, not I, but Christ lives in me. When we remember that Christ gives the Lord's Prayer in the Sermon on the Mount, he says, you've asked me how we should pray, and we should pray like this. And he, Christ, the Son, speaks these words to his Father. So when we take this prayer into our own meditation, when we pray this, when we take this prayer and we pray this prayer, it is as if that which belongs to the Son in us, I mean S-O-N, that which belongs to the Son in us addresses that which belongs to the Father in us. What is becoming speaks to what is, to what has created. The becoming speaks to the created. Can you forgive the unforgivable? In a sense, you could say, only the unforgivable is interesting in this theme, because if it's forgivable, there's no more to say. Do it. It's the unforgivable that presents the real challenge. And I think you may be aware of many examples where human beings have been able to forgive in the most unexpectedly brutal, cruel, miserable circumstances. There are survivors from Auschwitz who have forgiven their guards. There was a man in Ireland called Gordon Wilson who in 1987 lost his daughter when they were both very badly injured in a bomb explosion. He survived, but his daughter, who was holding his hand as they lay under the rubble of the wall that collapsed on them, she died. And a short time afterwards, he was able to say, I forgive those who have perpetrated this terrible deed. There's a particular example of a woman who survived Auschwitz. Her name is Eva Kor. You can look her up on Google. It's a beautiful story. For a long time after the war, she was unable to talk about or engage in any kind of dialogue with what happened to her during the war, what she experienced as a child in Auschwitz. There comes a moment later in her life when she begins to talk about it and do research, and she discovers that one of the guards from Auschwitz is still alive. And she contacts him, and the dialogue ensues between them. A beautiful dialogue ensues between them. And there comes a moment when she says, I would like to give this man something. And she thinks for a long while, what shall I give him? She even describes that she went around the shops looking, what could I buy and give him? And there comes a moment then when she says, I know what I could give him. I can give him forgiveness. And she actually does so. They go together to Auschwitz, and it's a story of reconciliation and forgiveness. But what strikes me as particularly pertinent about this story is that the forgiveness she offers him is not something her religion has taught her to do. It's not something that her conscience has pricked her to do. It's not something that arises from the expectations of others around her. She carries the question for a while, what is it that I could give him? She thinks about it. And into that open thinking descends an intuition that comes from nowhere that belongs to her past biography. She realizes that forgiveness is what she can give him, and indeed she does. It's a sad story because, in another sense, because all the other survivors of the Holocaust who heard about this story, I can't say all of them, but many of the survivors of the Holocaust who heard about this were bitterly angry with Eva Kor because somehow they felt she had betrayed them by forgiving. They didn't understand that, and they remained in their paradigm of not being able to forgive. And I'm reminded by these stories of the last words that Christ speaks in the Luke Gospel, chapter 23, when he says, "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do." Well, I have three more thoughts that I would like to briefly add, if I may tax your patience a little longer. Forgiveness does not restore the lost innocence. It does not. But it creates a new strength in the same way that any therapy does not restore the lost health before the illness. Any kind of therapy does not make you well again as you were before. It offers a new kind of health. And that's the nature of forgiveness. We can't go back into paradise. But the forgiveness is the opportunity of a new strength developing. I think many of you will be familiar with the events in the last years of Rudolf Steiner's life. The first Goetheanum burnt down in Christmas 1922-23. And in 1923, Rudolf Steiner spent the year living with the question, what shall I do? It had already become clear to him before that there were many members who, at one level, eagerly embraced the anthroposophy he was bringing, but at another level, didn't really live it in the way that he had expected. He knew that the fire was a sign that the membership were not sufficiently strong in their spiritual work, which might have protected the Goetheanum. The fact that it was destined to be destroyed by fire is another story. But Rudolf Steiner realized more and more during that year that there were very few anthroposophists who really understood what it was that he was doing and what that meant in terms of a responsibility. And so he had, in the late part of 1923, he had the thought, maybe I should retire into a kind of monastic existence with the few members who understand what this anthroposophical thing is really all about and get on with the work with those who understand it. And it's interesting that Rudolf Steiner had to have this thought. He had to entertain that possibility in order to know that that was not what he really had to do. In fact, he did just the opposite. He traveled around Europe. He founded national societies in several countries. And then he called the Christmas Foundation in December 1923. And at that Christmas Foundation meeting, he joined the Anthroposophical Society, the refounded Anthroposophical Society. And many of you will know very well that in doing that, in joining an earthly legal entity as a spiritual teacher, he took a great risk. And the risk was, will the spiritual world continue to respond to my spiritual investigations in the way that they have until now, if I unite my destiny with an earthly legal entity such as this newly founded Anthroposophical Society? And he took that step without knowing what the response of the spiritual world will be. As it happened, the spiritual world said a big yes to his risk, and he continued to be able to do his spiritual research after having taken that step. But he didn't know that at that moment. And so I would like to characterize that gesture of Rudolf Steiner's. Sometimes it's referred to in the following way. Rudolf Steiner forgave the members. And I can understand where that concept comes from, but I wonder if the word forgive does justice to the immensity of actually what Rudolf Steiner did at that moment. Because if I put it into my own words, it's nothing less than this. Rudolf Steiner's love for the members was greater than his care to preserve his connection with the spiritual world. That was the Michaelic courage that allowed him to take that risk, and the spiritual world responded with abundance. And the Karma lectures and the School of Spiritual Science all then flowed through him after that. Okay, now really comes the last thought. Last week, we were busy with the theme of Michael, and in connection with that, we looked at a meditation that Rudolf Steiner gave to Ita Wegman. And it's a meditation that describes how human beings have the responsibility to work in such a way in the darkness that it becomes light, and that light can then be offered to the spiritual world. And in that meditation, there's a wonderful line, and it goes like this: soul found soul. And it describes the collaboration, the intimate working together that two human beings can have together in doing the work of Michael on earth for the spiritual world. Soul found soul. And it describes the harmony and the collaboration and the symbiosis, maybe even, that can exist between two human beings in that Michaelic work on earth, in the realm of Ahriman, for the Christ. Now, it may be that feeling, I mean, somewhere you will know this, somewhere in your own biography, you will know you have found an individual, or maybe several individuals, with whom you recognize the possibility of spiritual collaborative work for the future. That kind of soul finding soul may have its origin in the supersensible school of Michael, where together we participated in the great preparation between the 15th, 16th, and 17th centuries, the great preparation in order that now in the 20th and 21st centuries, anthroposophy can live and grow on earth. And it may be that this soul finding soul in this collaborative harmony goes back to a resolve we took together to meet again on earth in the task of Michael. On the other hand, it may also be the case that if we find a companion soul with whom we can work together now, it may be that that possibility of fruitful cooperation actually comes from a previous incarnation when forgiveness was that which created the possibility then for us now to find ourselves in this harmonious collaborative work together. And then one can say one thing more. When our destiny now brings us into conflict with someone else, and the possibility of forgiveness is there, it may be that we realize that this forgiving now is not just a clearing up of the past for the sake of not having to do it next time, but that forgiveness now might be the necessary step in this incarnation so that we find ourselves together, soul finding soul, in the next incarnation, so that we can be together servants of Michael and companions with Christ. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Andrew. I'll take a quick moment, and I'm going to allow participants to unmute themselves. Doesn't mean please do it, but you'll have the power to. For the sake of orderly questions and answers, I'll ask that you put your questions in the chat and I can call on you. For those on the phones, *6 will unmute. *9 will be a figurative raised hand to let us know that you'd like to say something. Let me just double check myself here. Yep, cool. All right. Yeah, many thanks in the chat. All right, I'm not seeing questions yet, but statements. Does anyone have any questions? Well, I had seen one from Martha earlier. Who is Hannah Arendt, whom you mentioned before your Hamlet reference?
Hannah Arendt is a well-known author who has written a lot on this theme of forgiveness. Hannah Arendt, A-R-E-N-D-T.
Hi, I have a question. Hi, Andrew. What happens in the next life where one person has forgiven and the other person hasn't?
Yes. I mean, normally one thinks of one person needing to forgive something that the other one has done, but your question presupposes that there's been a bit of inhumanity on both sides. Is that right?
Yes. Yeah.
Yes. Is that Katerina asking the question?
Yes, it is. Yeah.
Yeah. I think I've tried to say this afternoon for some of you, that the effects of this forgiveness do not depend on the other party feeling any remorse or regret. Maybe the unilateral forgiveness of the one will already be a step towards something different in the future. I can't say, Katerina, I'm sorry, that doesn't lie within my experience. I can't say that. But the fear that it might not be effective should never then be a reason for abstaining from forgiveness. I mean, I don't know if that's going in the direction of your question, but already the forgiveness from one will not be without its effect. I can't say what the effect will be.
Okay, thank you.
I would like actually to bring something that Andrew is probably aware. I remember reading from Sergei Prokofiev about the book about forgiveness, and he's suggesting that if there's forgiveness of like substantial forgiveness, then it can actually be a basis where the one who forgives becomes a kind of like a kind of teacher position in relation to the one who's forgiven, that the one who's forgiven kind of feels the other is a teacher for them in the next life. So how do you kind of see the same, Andrew, or what do you think about that?
Well, Sergei must have written that out of some kind of an experience, and that's what he has written. I think the point that I wanted to make was that there will certainly be a coming together in a collaborative way, and I think in the future, already now, the task of a teacher is not to be a top-down giver of information, but actually to work together. So whether it's as a teacher or whether it's as a guiding neighbor or a supportive colleague, I think that will depend on the biographies of the individuals and all the other circumstances that belong to their next incarnation. So I wouldn't say it has to be as a teacher, but you know very well that we can learn from each other, even if the other never sees herself as a teacher. So that
I did
yeah,
and I didn't mean it as like being in that kind of like higher position, but more that the other one is recognizing and kind of appreciating learning and that
yes.
kind of thing. Yeah.
But I think the teachers amongst you all, are you a teacher, Satu? Are you a teacher?
No, not really. No.
Well, I think that the teachers here will immediately know what I mean if I say, actually, if the work is going well, you learn at least as much as you think you're teaching. So a child or the group of children or adults may very well be the source of new and precious experiences. So I would take teaching here in absolutely the widest sense.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Andrew, could I just mention, it's not a question, but you did say you would give the references.
Yes, thank you, Ted.
And thank you very much for those wonderful talk.
Thank you, Ted. So
before you do that, can I say something in response to the last thread?
Yes.
This question of you will do as I have done and more, you know, Christ says to the disciples. So in Prokofiev's book about, it's called The Occult Significance of Forgiveness. But this question has lived with me forever since I first heard it. You will do as I have done and more. So the capacity that you're describing, the capacity that comes from this offering that then creates a possibility for something new to come on earth as it is in the heavens, right? So all this relationship to what I can offer freely that is building a bridge toward another who may not yet be able to do that. Prokofiev says, in relationship to this idea, you will do as I have done and more, I am then able to take on what you cannot. I will take it on with you. You know, we will then, you know, whenever that time is, that we can share the Christ work together. And I think in forgiveness, as you've described, allows for such a possibility to come into being.
Indeed, so. It does, Jane. Thank you. You put it very beautifully. And I think it's the way you put it exemplifies what I was trying to say, that what Christ shows us is actually nothing that we can't begin to recognize is a task we wish to rise to. Is it all right if I put it like that? And that what we see, in the life of Christ. Sorry.
We must rise to. I'm sorry for interrupting you.
No, yes. No, please. I mean, we must. All right. The point is, we recognize that we can. Then the obligation is something we may also recognize. Yes. Thank you, Jane. Thank you. So, Ted, the answer to your question is, there is a book in English published under the title Christ and the Human Soul. And it's GA 155. The lecture was given on the 15th of July, 1914. And it's lecture 3 in Christ and the Human Soul.
Thanks, Andrew. Thank you. Much appreciated.
There you go.
Andrew.
Yes, yeah.
I think that your talk was phenomenally good, to the point of making me cry in several points. But there is one thing that I would just wish to underline,
please,
which is that the forgiveness has to happen while we are incarnated, in order to become or allow things to become at another level, either in the spiritual world or in the next incarnation. The first step is now, because we are incarnated, that we are empowered to do. Christ himself was in the phase of incarnation when he forgave humanity and took on the sins of humanity, but he needed to be incarnated when doing so. And then things develop, but the moment is now. And the urgency that you mentioned in the meditation that Steiner gave to Ita Wegman, it's almost an exhortation, as you called it on Friday, not to wait for the future to develop in spite of our incapacity to face it. But because we are incarnated, we can shape the future. And there is an urgency to do so, to shed that darkness, to break that darkness by bringing the light that was given to us by Christ.
Thank you, Yaya. Yes, indeed. It is indeed something that can only be done on earth, because it is on earth that we face the threshold, the difficulties that may be connected with that, and overcoming those on earth is what is significant. I suppose it raises the question, I have to be incarnated on earth in order to forgive, but can I forgive somebody who has already crossed the threshold of death into the spiritual world? And their individual experience will have to illuminate whatever answer is appropriate.
Andrew, might I ask a question? It's Angus.
Yes, good evening, Angus.
Hello. There are many situations where the conflict that arises may have a backstory from one or more past lives. One of the tales you told was Hamlet, and we know from something Steiner said that in a way this is modeled on a real character, Hamlet, who had in a past life been Aeneas, the Trojan hero. So as a Trojan hero, and in the deeds that followed, he will have killed various people. Now he finds himself in a situation which involves fighting and death and so on and so forth. And I'm not asking you to go into any of those kinds of details or to take that as a reality necessarily, but merely, given that you were dealing with this play, as an illustration of the fact that a scenario can arise in which one person, let's say it's me, feels I'm being badly done by, but I might have done something bad in a past life to someone else. And so there's a whole reciprocating pattern and balances and so on that are going on that are not helpful. Now, in a way, you've covered all of this, but I wondered if you'd like to say anything about how you see what you've been talking about playing out in the bigger story of karma over time.
I mean, you end with a question, but everything you said as a prelude to the question is the answer, absolutely, that there is a backstory. Of course, there's always a backstory, and we end up in this kind of either wanted or not wanted intimacy with individuals because of what has happened or has not happened in the past. I think that's always so. There are places where Rudolf Steiner indicates quite clearly we come back into more or less the same groupings every time. Sounds depressing maybe, but it also has its beautiful truth that we come back into the community, into the constellation that we were in before, and new possibilities arise out of exactly what you describe as the backstory. And so I tried to indicate that right at the end, Angus, that when you feel a soul companionship with someone, that may come from either companionship in the supersensible school of Michael, or it may come from something that arose last time, or, and this is the mystery, the time before last, because so often in describing these karmic relationships, Rudolf Steiner describes that actually what happens in one life goes back to maybe 2 or more lives back. So yes, But the point of interest for me was when you feel this soul companionship and you're not clairvoyant and can't immediately say where it comes from, it might help to carry as a possibility, maybe we knew each other in the super sensible school of Michael, maybe this harmonious collaboration that we can engage in now is the fruit of forgiveness between us in a previous incarnation. It's not speculative, but just carrying those thoughts allows the possibility of some kind of an intuition maybe to come later. But even more importantly, because all these things that we've said and your question is looking back. For me, the significant thing is, what does it mean for the future, in the sense that Yaya was asking her question? And therefore, are we big enough, are we brave enough to recognize that when there is a conflict with someone, it must have its origins in the past, but actually Michael is not interested in that, not in the least. He's only interested what we do with that now into the future. So absolutely, without knowing what the backstory, as you call it, is, have we the courage and have we the moral intuition to forgive, not for the sake of feeling better ourselves, but so that that can be the beginning of a process in which, in the next incarnation, we can work together. Because I don't think it's a surprise to anyone in this exalted company if I say, the difficulties we have with people are a sure sign that we have unfinished business with them. And therefore, if any of this is true, then it becomes, in the sense that Yaya was saying, a matter of urgency, that we don't cultivate and celebrate the differences between each other, but that we allow the possibility of letting go of the expectation of being apologized to, letting go of the need to be told that we are right, letting go of the need to experience a kind of triumphalism when we successfully show that the other person is wrong. Can we let go of these little ego characteristics that probably we all in one way or another know, and embrace the other, either really in defiance of all the COVID regulations, or metaphorically? Can we embrace the other in a gesture for an as yet unknown future? So your question had to do with the backstory, but I know you, Angus, and I know you will understand if I take that backstory and say it's true, but it's not what's interesting. What is actually of interest to Michael today is not the backstory. It's the as yet unwritten future. Thank you.
Yes, Andrew.
Yes, Maria.
Yes, thank you for your lecture, first of all. But there is something that came to mind, and is that in some ways we are actually collaborating with Michael in his destiny ordering will capacity. I think I remember reading something in a meditation or in one of the lectures of Steiner, that Michael has a destiny will capacity, so he can realign in some ways the destiny of human beings and humanity, and that for me this forgiveness without condition is a way of working with him on that.
Yes, most definitely. I'm not quite sure what you mean by Michael realizes the destiny. He may have expectations.
No, it was my accent. Is realigning, reordering.
Yes.
Or reworking.
To bring order into karma. Yes.
Yes.
And that's why it's this. Thank you, Maria. Yes, it's this challenge to bring order into karma that made me add at the end of my talk on Friday it's not just a question of soul finding soul, but it's actually also a question of, can soul seek soul? Can we find connections that aren't necessarily just given to us out of the backstory of destiny, but can we make new connections to expedite this healing of karma? Yes, you use the word realign. I think that's very beautiful, because things are out of alignment. And yes, forgiveness is one way of finding the true alignment. Thank you, Maria.
Hello, Andrew.
Hello, Wendy.
Hi. Just wanted to pick up on what you said about, can we forgive people over the threshold? And Steiner does write about that. And in one of his lectures, he says it's one of the biggest gifts that the so-called living can give to the so-called dead is to forgive them, so that they don't encounter obstacles in Kamaloka in the way that that you describe. So we can do that.
Good. Thank you very much, Wendy. Yes. Thank you.
I'm going to briefly, there's a number of questions in the chat, and there's about 15 minutes yet. So if no one objects, I might just begin reading. And I'm sorry if I miss any.
Yes, please.
I had seen, let's see, from Michael, I've lost it now. Whether, let's see, I remember it being whether or not forgiveness transmorphs or transmogrifies the moon or past karma into sun or future karma.
Yes, who asked that question?
Oh, I'm sorry, I have it now. As a broad formula, oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, who asked that question?
Oh, Michael Alberts, and I see it now. As a broad formula, does the act of forgiveness transmute moon past karma into sun future karma?
Yes, absolutely it does. Yes, I think so. I think that follows from some of the thoughts I've been trying to to give expression to.
Great, thank you. Lily asks, what is the role of apology?
Depends on the motivation for it. Sometimes you can apologize. You can apologize for all sorts of reasons. I don't think apology in itself has significance. What gives the apology significance is what lives in your heart and your soul when you make the apology. And I don't know if there's more to say about that. Yeah, if it's true and if it comes from the heart, then it may find its way into the heart of the person you're apologizing to. I think the apology of its own doesn't have significance. What gives apology significance is what lives in the heart of the person who offers the apology.
Thank you, much appreciated. I see from Christina, what if someone tried to destroy an initiative you were responsible for, a spiritual initiative, so the attack was not only you, but also to a spiritual initiative? Where lies the capacities to forgive what goes beyond personal destiny?
Yeah, I mean, it's a very general question, and in every case it will apply in a specific case. I don't think forgiveness is impossible there. I don't think forgiveness is ineffective simply because it's something bigger than personal destiny. No, I think forgiveness there, letting go. I mean, perhaps you realize that throughout this sharing of my incomplete thoughts, I'm struggling with the adequacy of the term forgiveness. That's why I titled this Beyond Forgiveness, because actually, it seems to me that it consists, particularly now in the sense of Christina's question, it consists of, can I let go of the need to be apologized to? Can I let go of the expectation that my being badly treated entitles me to some kind of compensation? I think once we achieve that, then everything is open, and it will be depending from case to case what then happens. The significant thing is that am I able to let go of my little ego attachment to what has happened? Can another paradigm break in beyond the expectations of my little ego? And can I rise to letting go of what I might be entitled to in a legalistic sense and make space for something that is unpredictable? And I think that will be true of an interpersonal situation as well as in an institutional situation, and as well in the sense of Christina's question, if I've understood it correctly, when the attack was not to me, but to an initiative that may have involved other people.
Thank you very much.
And
I'm sorry, go ahead.
And
please.
I want to add one thing to what you just said, Andrew, which is that forgiveness has to be unconditional to the point that we do not need it to be recognized.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. I don't even need to be thanked for it.
Exactly.
I mean, it's nice if that comes. It's nice if the forgiveness is recognized, but that's a bonus. It can't be part of the initial expectation.
Yeah.
Are there more questions, Jonathan?
There are, yes. And I think your answer preempts Deborah's, but I'll ask it anyway in case there's more you wish to say. Is it essential to forgive another face-to-face, or is it as significant to forgive the other from within?
If destiny allows you to forgive face-to-face, it's wonderful if that can happen. But if destiny doesn't allow you to forgive face-to-face, the inner deed will work, whether or not, I don't want to say the recipient, what shall I say? Whether or not the person you're forgiving knows about it or not. They will know about it eventually, but they may not know it immediately.
Excellent, thank you. I think I've gotten all the questions in there. Oh, I'm sorry, I see Lily just piped in, and there was a hand up from Jenny.
Has a question?
Yeah, but so Lily asks, what if one doesn't believe in reincarnation?
You don't have to believe in it, it happens anyway.
That works. And I see Jenny has her hand raised, so please unmute if you want to ask your question. And then Travis after Jenny.
Where's Jenny?
Yeah, here I am. In the process of forgiveness, which is a process, it seems to me, and it's a question, that a really profound understanding of the other person is required in order to really forgive them. Hello?
Yes, I'm listening.
Well, I'm in the process of trying to forgive somebody, and the only way I can do it is to completely understand why they did what they did. Because until I can understand that, the forgiveness seems to be incomplete.
Yes, I can understand what you're saying. I don't for a moment presume to make a comment on that, because that's your experience. But it might be the case that if you manage to do the forgiving, the understanding will come afterwards. It might be the case. If you make the understanding the precondition, you may be putting an obstacle in your own way there. Not that the understanding is unimportant, but maybe the forgiveness is the prelude to another level of intimacy with that person, which will include an understanding. I don't know, Jenny. You're obviously dealing with a real example, and it's a very abstract thing for me. But of course, that's why I started at the very beginning. What would you rather, be forgiven or be understood? And I hope it became clear this evening that for me, the premium is on understanding. So Jenny, yes, absolutely, yes, the importance of understanding. But maybe that understanding comes through letting go of the need to understand as well. You know, sometimes when we feel we need something and it doesn't come, if we let go of the need for it, unexpectedly it comes in another way. I don't know whether that will apply in your case. I'm sorry, I don't want to preach about this now, but the way you signal the importance of understanding, I recognize absolutely. Thank you.
No, thank you. That was enormously helpful.
Thank you. Thomas.
Thank you so much for what you spoke of when Rudolf Steiner forgave the society, and that it was out of a profound love. For me, I've danced around the edges of anthroposophy for 20 years before I could commit, because I saw so much arrogance and so much one-upmanship. 40 years ago is different than it is today, certainly in the United States from my experience. But I wanted to say it was that deed of love out of which Steiner did that actually kept me going and put me in a position to take responsibility, join first class, be the point person for anthroposophy in Boulder, Colorado. Have you taken this work and related it to the virtues, as Witzenman speaks of, let's say in cancer, selflessness becomes catharsis, which prepares the ground for compassion, which leads us to freedom. I heard this continuously in what you were so wonderfully presenting, much more concretely, but have you correlated that to this work with the virtues and the cycle of the year?
No, I haven't, Thomas, but it's very beautiful the way you make that connection, and perhaps that's something I can take up. So thank you, thank you. And I would like to say it's very beautiful the way you describe. I love this image of dancing around it before you could make the commitment. And I think very often dancing around something could be seen as negative, but I find it wholly positive. I need to dance around this before I can take the step. So the step is taken having danced around it and probably seen it from so many different points of view. And just on this point that you say about the arrogance and so on, it's always a shame when anthroposophy is judged by the behavior of anthroposophists.
Absolutely.
We are no better than any other people, and sometimes we behave in a much worse way because we pretend that we know better. So thank you so much, Thomas.
It's a wonderful saying in Germany, we all cook with water.
And with fire. And with fire.
We got to heat the water.
Yes.
But thank you so much for what you offered today. It was splendid.
Thank you, Thomas.
Thank you, Andrew.
Thank you all. Victor, did you have a question?
Yes, actually I do. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, good evening, Victor.
Thank you for this. It's been a very moving lecture. And I have a question though, that I was told once that forgiveness happens when an action stops. And my question goes to what happens for those people who have continuing abuser relationships? What happens when you're told, like in the Gospels, you must forgive it 70 times 7? Where does that point come where forgiveness becomes educational for the abuser? They stop doing it. And what is the appropriate place on the one who's abused to not be naive and continue to forgive what is clearly an act of violation?
Victor, your question is incredibly timely because in the current situation that so many of the people in the world are in, this incidence of abuse is increasing enormously, or maybe just we hear about it even more. So your question is absolutely timely, but it's not a question that relates to any experience of my own. And I don't know what to say, except that I think in the situation, the person who's being abused, I don't think there is a general answer to your absolutely pertinent question. I think only in each situation will the individual herself know what it is that belongs now to her destiny. To stay and continue to be abused and to forgive, that may be the destiny in some cases, it really may be. Or is it the destiny to leave, but nevertheless to forgive? Victor, it's a huge question, and I feel very, very inadequate now in what I'm struggling to put into words. But such a situation is a destiny situation. As Angus was saying, there's a backstory to this, and there's a backstory to this horrid dilemma that so many people now face. And in the sense that Jenny was asking, I want to understand it. It may not be possible to understand what the backstory and what's really going on. And still the person suffering the abuse has to act, to stay consciously and to suffer the abuse and to continue forgiving, or to find a way of leaving. And I'm sorry, I'm now dancing around your question, not really answering it, but I think it really depends on the individual circumstances and the capacity of the individual to awaken to what really her destiny in this situation is. And that destiny means the future, not the past.
Thank you. That's a very clear answer, even though if it's incomplete, it's actually the true answer, I think.
Well, thank you for hearing it. Thank you, Victor. So Jonathan, you've been a wonderful patient host. Thank you.
Thank you. I was going to say, we have come to time, and there are 2 hands raised. Are you up for answering them before we close, or shall
Oh
we
yes, I'm up for it, certainly.
Sounds good. I will ask that we stop with Travis and Dick. Thank you for your patience. Travis, if you could.
I'll just be a moment, and thank you, Andrew, for a wonderful presentation. And I'm kind of following up with what Thomas said. We were obviously getting the same download, because for me, I kept going back to the virtues. Love leads to devotion, which leads to force of sacrifice. And as I was seeing this, as you were speaking, I was seeing this forgiveness as little triumphs of love until we get to this one great Christ love, to where we realize there's truly nothing to forgive. There is no abuser, there is no abuse, and in the grand, that force of sacrifice, and me being willing to sacrifice my needs, my desires, my wants, my rights, my freedom, all out of that force of love. And I wanted to see how that landed, if that's resonates with you. So
yes, indeed it does. And you've described the possible grand finale that we might all reach one day. But on the way there really is abuse and torture and insult and injury. So you're describing the big picture, which is beautiful. And that big picture lives so beautifully in the way we tell fairy stories to children. There's always a happy end. And some people may say, well, that doesn't really prepare them for the horrors of life, for divorce and illness and COVID and so on. Why don't we tell children stories that really prepare them for the horrors of life? And of course, that would be completely wrong. Exactly, Travis, what you say lives in the happy end that we tell, that comes at the end of the stories we tell to children, because they've come from the spiritual world with the view of that great, not Thomas dancing around, but dancing together. That's the big picture at the end that you referred to, Travis. But on the way, there's a lot of pain. And forgiveness is one of the ways of getting to that place where we dance together. Thank you, Travis. Was there one more?
Yeah, and thank you very much. Dick Halford, did you want to ask your question?
Yes. What about asking for forgiveness from somebody who you can't contact?
You mean it can't contact in an earthly sense, Dick?
Either because you don't know how to contact earthly, or they may have left the planet. You just don't know where they are. You're talking about past things, and not everything that everybody's done has always been correct.
Well, I think there's a very clear answer to that. Just make it an inner gesture of this forgiveness. Make it an inner gesture and offer that through your angel to the angel of the individual that you are seeking to forgive. And trust that if it comes from your heart, it will not miscarry on the way.
Thank you very much.
Does that make sense, Dick?
Tremendous sense, thank you.
But that depends on confidence that the angels will serve such energies that flow between us, and they will.
Thank you so much, Andrew, and everyone else. I'm going to have a quick formal thank you and goodbye, and then I'll leave the meeting running if people want to discuss or talk with each other. But yeah, thank you again very much, Andrew. Your talk was
First of all, I would like to thank you, Jonathan, for organizing and for hosting and for the technical support that makes it possible, and Andre especially also then for initiating this and asking me to participate in this, and for the opportunity to meet so many people in such a rich virtual way. And the richness of the encounter in some way transcends the fact that it is virtual. Somewhere a human reality can live through this way of meeting each other. I experience that very strongly. It's not a substitute for really meeting, but it is a reality in its own way. Thank you, Andre. And thank you, Jonathan.
You're welcome.
Andrew,
Thank you.
we're looking for the future collaboration with you again. Thank you so much.
Thank you, indeed.